Hey mamas, welcome to week 1 of Love in Action, which is our Bible study that we're doing all about love. And we're going to focus on love in a variety of ways. But today we want to talk about God's love for us and look at some examples of God's love from the Bible. He gives us lots of great examples of his love that we can apply to our lives even today as moms that are very relevant. So let's get into it. If you've not been here before, welcome to Families with Grace. It is the Christian mom's resource for everything faith and family. There's all sorts of practical and spiritual things that you can find, both here and also at familieswithgrace.com. So, okay, let's get into it. As moms, our days are filled with moments that challenge us and bless us, often in equal measure. But in the midst of all of this, we do have one constant, and that's God's love. His love is the cornerstone of our faith. It's a source of strength in our everyday lives. And I'm pulling out for you 5 stories from the Bible today that remind us his love is unchanging and available to us all the time. So we're going to dive into these beautiful Bible stories that really highlight the depth of God's love for us and talk about how it impacts our lives as moms and how we can live that out for and with our families. Okay, so the first story that we're going to talk about is the prodigal son, which is a story of redemption and open arms and how God comes to us even when we wander away. So the parable of the prodigal son comes from Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 32. And it reminds us that God's love will always welcome us back. He will always welcome us back with open arms, no matter how far we've gone. So in this story, a father has 2 sons, and the younger son decides he wants to take his inheritance early and leave home because he's just over it. He wants to do his own thing. But he wastes all of his money on reckless living, and then he finds himself starving in a famine, and he's just longing for the food that he's feeding to pigs. So he decides it's time to go back to his father, and he's hoping that at the very least his dad will let him be a servant. But instead, his dad sees him coming from far off and runs to meet him and then celebrates his return with a feast. So here's how this applies to us. Because as moms, we often feel like we need to have everything together. But the love of God is not based on our perfection. When we make mistakes, maybe losing our temper, or when we feel like we're falling short, we can trust in God's grace. Take a moment to pray and reset, knowing his love and grace never wavers. And we also want to teach our kids about the beauty of forgiveness. We can use this story to explain no matter what they do, they can always turn to their Heavenly Father and you for love and acceptance. Model forgiveness in your family by letting go of grudges and showing grace, including to your children and your spouse. And you can be encouraged because the story of the prodigal son is a beautiful reminder of how God's love meets us in every season of life, including motherhood in all of its seasons. Just as the father in the story welcomed his son home with open arms, God welcomes us with grace and love, no matter how far we feel that we've strayed. When motherhood feels overwhelming and you're wrestling with guilt over mistakes or shortcomings, remember, God's love is not based on your performance, and neither is your kids'. He sees your heart and offers new mercies every morning. If you're walking through a tough season right now with a child, this story can also serve as a reminder of the power of unconditional love. The father did not give up on his son, even when he was far away. As moms, we can continue to pray, love, and trust that God will work in our children's hearts, even when we don't see the results right away. God's love reaches places we can't, and he is always calling our children back to him. Take heart in knowing God rejoices over you just as the father celebrated his son's return. He's not waiting for you to have it all together before he loves you. Instead, he meets you in your mess, offering rest, grace, and a love that never fails. In every season of motherhood, whether it's joyful, messy, or exhausting, or a mix of all of those, you can trust that God's love is more than enough to carry you through. The next time you feel overwhelmed, take a moment to breathe and reflect on how God welcomes you with open arms just as you are. Let this truth encourage you to extend some of that same grace to yourself and to others. All right, the second story we want to look at is the story of the Good Samaritan. And in this story, which comes from Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 27, Jesus tells of a Jewish man who is beaten and he's left for dead on the side of the road. A priest and a Levite, both who are respected figures within religion, pass by without helping. But a Samaritan, someone despised by the Jewish people, stops to take care of the injured man. He takes care of his wounds, and then he takes him to an inn and even pays for his care. Jesus uses this story to teach the kind of love and compassion that we need to have that goes beyond social and cultural barriers. It embodies what it really means to love our neighbor. And practically, as moms, we have opportunities every single day to show kindness. It could be offering a smile to another mom at the store, helping a neighbor in need, or organizing a play date for a mom who seems lonely. These small acts of kindness reflect God's goodness and teach our children what it means to love others. Love in action. And we also want to make sure that we're teaching our kids about helping others by involving them in acts of service. Maybe you can bake cookies for a neighbor or donate toys or do some volunteering as a family. All of those experiences plant seeds of compassion in your children's hearts that can only grow. And you can be encouraged today with the story of the Good Samaritan because it reminds us that small, intentional acts of kindness really can make a big difference. As moms, our days are filled with opportunities to love and serve, even in simple ways like comforting a child after a tough day, offering a kind word to another mom, or lending a hand to someone in need. These seemingly small moments of love reflect the heart of God and teach our children what it means to live out His love in practical ways. It's easy to feel like the work we do as moms goes unnoticed. But the Good Samaritan shows us love in action is never wasted. Just as the Samaritan's compassion had a lasting impact on the injured man, your kindness can make a difference in the lives of those around you, from your family to those outside of your family as well. Whether it's a meal shared with a struggling friend or a listening ear offered to your spouse, every act of love is a reflection of God's goodness at work through you. And when you feel stretched thin, because that will happen, especially as we're loving and pouring into others, remember that God equips you to love others with His strength. You don't have to do it all or have every answer. God uses even your smallest efforts to make an impact. Lean into His love, knowing that as you care for your family and extend kindness to others, you are living out the example that we're given in the Good Samaritan. You're showing God's love in tangible, meaningful ways that will have a huge impact. Look for small ways to show love to someone around you today. These acts of love can reflect the glory of God. The third story we want to take a look at is Ruth and Naomi, which is a story of faith and loyalty and how God takes care of us. So the book of Ruth shows us a beautiful example of all of this and trusting in God's plan. It tells us the story of a Moabite woman named Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi. After the death of their husbands, Naomi decides to return to her homeland and she urges Ruth to stay behind. But Ruth says, nope. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. And that's from Ruth 1:16. Ruth's loyalty leads her to a whole new life in Bethlehem, where she ends up meeting Boaz, who's kind and eventually becomes her husband. And through this relationship and marriage, Ruth becomes part of the lineage of Jesus, which demonstrates God's provision and faithfulness. He took care of Ruth and honored her faithfulness to her mother-in-law. So for us today, we can understand this by trusting that God's plan can be hard. Sometimes when life feels uncertain, it's really hard to pray and surrender your worries to God. But we can do that and trust that He sees our individual needs and He's guiding us through every situation. We can also foster loyalty and strong family bonds by creating meaningful traditions with our kids. Do something simple like a family fun night or even just bedtime prayers really can build connections that last for a lifetime. The story of Ruth and Naomi beautifully illustrates the power of loyalty and love even in the hardest times. As moms, we often find ourselves walking through seasons of uncertainty or struggle, whether it's juggling family responsibilities, dealing with financial pressures, or navigating changes in relationships. Ruth's steadfast devotion and commitment to Naomi reminds us God honors faithfulness, especially when we persevere in love and trust Him through the unknown. Ruth's story also shows us that we don't have to have all the answers in order to move forward. Like Ruth, who chose to follow Naomi and trust God's provision, we can take one step at a time, trusting God will guide us because He will. He is faithful. Whether it's loving our children through their struggles, supporting a friend in need, or holding on to hope in a challenging situation, our faithfulness and love is a reflection of God's heart and His unwavering faithfulness to us. When you feel like you're giving your all and you're still wondering what's next, take heart in knowing God sees you. He is at work, just as He was at work in Ruth's life. He's weaving His plan for good for you, even when it's hard for you to see it in the moment. Like Ruth, your love and commitment have the power to change lives, bringing hope and blessing to your family and others around you. Trust that God's faithfulness will sustain you and lead you into a season of His abundant grace. When you feel uncertain about your next steps, remember Ruth's loyalty and God's faithfulness. Pray for wisdom and trust in His plan, knowing He sees your heart and your efforts. Okay, the next story we want to take a look at is the lost sheep, which really gives us a picture of God's pursuing love. So in the parable of the lost sheep, which we can find in Luke 15:3-7, Jesus tells us of a good shepherd who leaves his 99 sheep to search for the one that has strayed. When he finds it, he picks it up and joyfully carries it home, celebrating the return of the sheep. This story really illustrates God's everlasting love for each one of us. No matter how far we wander from Him, He seeks us out and rejoices when we come back to Him. So how can we live this out? As moms, we often feel pulled in a million directions. But this story reminds us of the value of focusing on the one. Whether it's spending one-on-one time with your child or reaching out to a friend who is struggling, these moments really reflect the heart of God. You can also share this story with your children to teach them about the depth of God's love. Help them understand they are deeply valued and cherished just as they are. You can also be encouraged today. The parable of the lost sheep reminds us that every person matters deeply to God. As moms, I think we can often feel unseen or wonder if what we're doing truly makes a difference. But this story shows us God doesn't just see the crowd. He sees the one. He sees you. He sees you. He goes after the lost and hurting with relentless love, and that same love is extended to us every single day. Just as the shepherd didn't give up until he found the missing sheep, God's love for you is unending. On days when you feel like you're falling short or struggling to keep up, remember, God is not asking you to be perfect, and neither are your children. He delights in you as His child, and He seeks you out when you're weary or lost. You can rest in the truth that His love is not based on your performance, but is based on His unchanging character. Let this story encourage you to model that same love to your children, whether it's through a moment of patience when they've made a mistake, or through your persistence in guiding them back to the right path. Your efforts reflect God's heart. Trust that even in small, unseen moments, your love is making an eternal difference in their lives. And when you feel like the one who is lost, know God is always pursuing you with His arms wide open. Take a moment to really reflect on the idea that you are God's lost sheep, worth seeking and saving. When you feel unseen or unappreciated, take comfort in the assurance of God's presence. Let's also take a look at Paul on the road to Damascus, which is all about transformation and the transformation that can come with God's love. So we find this story in Acts chapter 9, verses 1-22, and it's one of the most dramatic examples of God's transformative love, because Paul does a major shift. So before encountering Jesus, Paul, who was then called Saul, was actually a Pharisee who persecuted Christians. And he was having Christians put to death. While traveling to Damascus in order to arrest believers, a bright light suddenly surrounded him, and he heard the voice of Jesus asking, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Blinded and overwhelmed, Paul obeyed Jesus' instruction to go into the city and wait. 3 days later, a man named Ananias followed God's command and prayed for Paul, and his sight was restored. From that moment, Paul's life completely changed. He went from being a persecutor of Christians to one of the most influential apostles, spreading the gospel across the world. In fact, a vast majority of the New Testament, or a lot of the New Testament, is written by this very person. So Paul's story shows us that no one is beyond God's reach. If you have loved ones who are far from faith, do not lose hope. Pray for them consistently and trust God can work in their lives in ways you can't even imagine. Also, as moms, we all have areas where we want to improve, whether it's being more patient, more present, or stronger in our faith. Just as Paul surrendered to God's call, we too can let him lead us through changes, both big and small. Start by praying for his guidance in the areas where you feel stuck or where you need growth. And finally, Paul did not hesitate to follow Jesus' instructions, even when it was scary and unclear. When you feel prompted by God, whether it's to encourage someone, serve your family differently, or let go of something weighing you down, trust his plan and take that step in faith, just like Paul did. Be encouraged today, mamas. Paul's life reminds us that God's love does not just forgive, it transforms. You're not defined by your past mistakes, your bad days, or the times you've fallen short as a mom. God's love sees your potential and works to shape you into someone who reflects his grace and his goodness. When you feel overwhelmed by guilt or inadequacy, remember Paul's story. If God can take someone like Saul, who actively fought against him, and turn him into one of the most impactful figures in Christianity, imagine what he can do in your life. Lean into God's love and let it renew your heart and mind. With his guidance, you can become the mom, wife, and woman he created you to be. I promise that you can. So today, just take a deep breath, trust in his power to work through you, and know that your story is still being written. So bringing it all together, living in God's love daily, is something that we really want to do. And the stories of God's love in the Bible are not just inspiring, they are deeply personal. They show us that his love is present in every season, whether we're navigating the chaos of parenting, strengthening our marriages, or loving others. God's love is a great love that meets us in our mess, pursues us when we wander, and restores us when we are broken. He is faithful and good, and we can enjoy that in our daily lives by living in God's love. So one great way to do that is meditating on a Bible verse that you start with each day and let his love set the tone for your day. I've got a free Bible reading plan for you that's all about love, and that's a great place to start with just a verse or two a day. I've got the link for you. And another great tip for focusing on the love of God is creating a gratitude journal to write down daily examples of how you see God's love in your life. Share this practice with your kids to help them recognize his goodness too. Get everybody involved in the whole family, and you can talk about these things. And don't forget to make time for quiet reflection or worship. Even 5 minutes can help you reconnect with the heart of God. We need that time with him. Finally, as we focus on love this week, let's take time to reflect on how God's love touches our daily lives, whether through the unwavering loyalty seen in the book of Ruth, the redemption of the prodigal son, or the compassion of the Good Samaritan. We are reminded that God's love is a constant source of hope and strength. Thanks so much for joining me this week. I hope that you've gotten something from this and that you've learned how God's love really is influential in our lives and makes such a big difference in our lives as moms and as we pour out to our families. If you want to find more, definitely check out the Love in Action series that is going on with Families with Grace. I'll have links for everything for you in the description as well. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you next week. Bye.